All right, guys, handling objections. All right, this is really exciting. Right? Customer experience is one of the top things. And of course, in the last lesson, we talked all about how do we uplift our levels of service. And remember to go check out Ron Kaufman's amazing book on that. He goes way into detail. I love the guy. Now, we're going to talk about sometimes things don't quite go as planned. So how do we handle objections? Now, the cool thing about it is we have it in the client experience because that's where most objections or a lot of objections come up, but this can also be used in sales as well, which is our next section. All right. So without anything, let's jump right in to handling objections. Now, the first thing before I even get started, a lot of times we see handling objections. We see objections themselves as a negative thing. I want you to reframe your mindset there. An objection is nothing more than a client or a prospect seeking more understanding. Hey, money's too, it's too expensive. They just want to know why it's so expensive, right? Don't see it as an actual objection, but a desire to learn more, okay? But there is a framework on how to go about this, okay? And I got a couple of stories for you along the way of how I've screwed this up so many times. So let's dive right in. I'm going to give you these 4 aspects of handling objections, and then we're actually going to go into them, okay? So let's jump into a screen share here. And number 1, there's 4 aspects. You got to do all 4. If you skip one, it can mess you up, all right? So the first thing that we want to do in terms of handling objection is acknowledgement. Show empathy, okay? So we're going to talk about this in a minute, but first thing we want to do is acknowledge the concern of the client. Number 2, we need to ask questions. We need to dig in, like what's really going on here. Number 3 is confirming, okay? Like, okay, so here's what I see the actual problem is. And then number 4 is responding. So many of us, we hear a problem and we immediately type to respond. As a guy, dude, this happens a lot, right? My wife is frustrated about something. She's like so angry at me and I just want to then go and fix it. But the reality is that probably the problem that I'm hearing isn't even the actual problem. Let me tell you a story. One time I was with a client. So back in the day, one of my jobs before we started Height was I'm all about service, right? And so one of my favorite things to do was to retain clients. A client was frustrated or angry or pissed off or whatever the case may be. I wanted to go in and retain them. I had a really good success rate. I mean, I was really good. Okay. And we'll talk about later why I got in. But one point in time, I completely screwed it up. See, what I did was we created this like little game at the work office where people would transfer me calls, right? Or set up a meeting and they would try to give me as little information as possible. And I would do everything I could to retain that client. So there was this lady, Miss Cindy jumps on the call. She's canceling everything with us. And all I know is that she just doesn't see the value in what we do. So I was like, all right. So I jump on the call. Hey, Miss Cindy, how's it going? Sweet lady. I mean, bless her heart. She taught me so much. I get on the call and she goes, listen, JC, I don't see any, I don't know where the value is. I don't understand what you guys are doing. And so immediately I just went off. And I mean, I had it all lined out. I heard her, pulled up her accounts. I could see the revenue. I could see the calls generated. I could see everything. So Miss Patty, like, I don't understand. What do you mean we're not adding value? She's like, well, I just don't. And then, look, can I show you something, Miss Patty? And I would kind of interrupt her and I would just go for it. I went from straight to like hearing her problem to let me solve this for you. And I was proving her. I was like, Miss Patty, like, and I even said this, hey, Miss Patty, like, it's clients like you that, man, this makes this job really hard for me. Like, we're doing so much. I mean, you're investing $1,000 and we're generating 100 calls a month and da-da-da. And I made her feel bad about it. And finally she interrupts me. She goes, JC, I don't think you're understanding. And I was like, Miss Patty, I of course I understand. Look at this. And then I was, you're right. JC, you don't understand. I literally don't understand the value. I've tried to reach out to my account manager and no one is responding to me. Like, I haven't gotten any reports. I literally don't know what you guys are doing and I don't understand the value. You see, I did not understand her actual problem. And so often this happens. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to pull this up and we're going to go through this framework. So the first thing is acknowledge. Guys, you can show empathy for anyone. And no matter how big the issue is, man, I completely understand that. I understand where you're coming from. Now, it doesn't mean you have to agree with their problem, but you should acknowledge their problem. Okay. Number 2 is we have to ask questions. All right. Number 3, confirm. Number 4, respond. Okay, let's dig into these just a little bit. So acknowledgement, this is about showing empathy. All right. You can empathize with your client regardless of what happens, right? So here, if a client was, the results are terrible. This was a terrible job. Hey, I completely understand the results suck. This is me agreeing to their problem. We shouldn't do that. Instead, we should show empathy by something like this. Yes, growing a business is really hard, and so is marketing. It sucks when we don't feel like it's going right. It sucks when we don't feel that we wanted a certain result and we didn't get a result. Okay, so we're showing empathy. All right, the next one is we're going to isolate the objection. We're going to ask questions. Okay, Miss Cindy, I'm so sorry. So you think it's expensive. Can I ask you a few questions here? Have you gotten other quotes before? Oh, you haven't. Okay. So have you done, I'm going to continue to ask questions. I'm going to continue like, hey, I understand the toilet's not working. Have you tried this? Have you tried that? I'm going to keep asking you as many questions as possible. In marketing, what a lot of times end up happening is a client will be like, dude, I don't think SEO is working, or I don't think PPC is working, or I don't think this is working. And what we'll do is we'll keep asking questions. Okay. So what the real problem is that the phone is ringing. You're growing your business, but you don't know if that growth actually has to do with the marketing we're doing or not. Yes. And what we're trying to boil it down is to one single problem that is our biggest problem. Okay, babe. So you're frustrated to do the dishes. You're frustrated to do this and that, but I keep asking questions. I keep asking, okay. So here, and now here's the clarifying part, right? Here is the actual problem. And you're going to ask this, okay, if I'm understanding everything right, what the real frustration is that the guys left a huge mess at your house. They went and did the roofing job. They did a great job. Everything was good. But really what happened was they left a mess. And you saw that as disrespectful. You saw that as which is completely true. But if they would have just cleaned up the mess, then probably we would have been good. Yes, that was okay. All right. And we're going to keep clarifying. And so guess what? If they say, no, you're not, no, okay, cool. We go back to asking questions until we have one clarifying statement, all right? And then once we get the clarifying statement, now we respond. Now is when we're going to dive in and go, okay, here's the solution. If you feel the customer feels that it's a bigger problem, sometimes not solving it right there can be huge. Even if you have the solution, by not solving right there, you're trying to match the intensity, okay? So, hey, client, dude, that's a huge deal. Do you mind? I want to chat with a couple of my managers. They completely trust your art. I get it. I want to talk to a couple of my managers. Can I call you back here in a couple of hours? I really want to dig into this for you, right? I'm showcasing a little bit more empathy before I come actually resolve the problem, right? Hey, do you mind if I go in and do some research on our marketing campaigns before I come back? Okay. Which brings me to the pro tip number 2, which is we are emotional beings. We're not logical beings as much as we want to be. Even great business people, we are emotional beings. Okay. And we know this. What we talked about in levels of service, right? We can have a client with the biggest problem in the world. And your response is like, oh, don't worry. It's Miss Cindy. She's amazing. Just call her up, let her know what happened, and we'll get it resolved. And yet at the same time, it could be a small problem. And you're like, oh my gosh, that's Richard. He is going to make this a big deal. Oh my gosh. It's the reality is here, guys, that we are emotional beings, not logical ones. And so what does that mean? That we need to make sure that whenever we're training for sales, when we're training for customer experience, when we're trying to handle objections, that we really kind of dig into this emotional thing, right? Now, it could be logic that's driving it, but we're emotional beings when it comes to overcoming the objection. All right. So with these 2 things in mind, right? We have levels of service, we have handling objections. Now it's time to jump into this idea of growth, right? How do we continue this journey of figuring out a way to grow with stability? Hope you guys have a great day.